62 years old. One replaced hip, a lower back that forecasts rain better than the Bureau of Meteorology, and somehow none of that was the worst part of what happened to me on that Sunday morning in the Blue Mountains. The worst part was what my wife said when she grabbed my arm in the dark. But we'll get there. Welcome to Whispered Truths. Get yourself comfortable, put the kettle on, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to do the right thing. They just chose differently. Drop a comment. Let us know where you're listening from. And if this is your first time here, consider subscribing. You're going to want to stay. My name is Graham Whitfield, retired structural surveyor, 62 years old, born and raised in the Hunter Valley, New South Wales, and living for the past 23 years on a property outside Leura in the Blue Mountains. 41 years in a profession that taught me one thing above all others. You cannot hide a crack forever. Pressure finds it. Time finds it. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, you're standing on the structure when it gives way. My wife is Diane Whitfield, 58 years old, former secondary school history teacher, amateur ceramicist, the kind of woman who remembers the name of every student she taught and sends cards on their birthdays even 20 years later. 31 years of marriage. I thought I understood her completely. I was wrong about that in ways I am still processing. Our son is Nathan Whitfield, 33. He has his mother's patience and my stubbornness, which is a combination that functions beautifully until it doesn't. 3 years ago, Nathan brought home a woman named Priya Okafor. She told us her father was Nigerian-born, her mother from Tamil Nadu, that she'd grown up in Brisbane, studied law at UQ, and pivoted into heritage property consulting. Sharp, warm, funny, in that dry Queensland way. She made Nathan laugh in a manner I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. We loved Priya, or whoever she actually was. Sunday, August 3rd, 6:48 inches the morning. The car park at Evans Lookout Trail, head in the Blue Mountains National Park, was cold and still. I had my thermos of tea, my walking poles, a jacket I'd owned for 16 years that Diane kept threatening to throw out, and not a single premonition that the next several hours would break something open in my life that could never be fully sealed again. "Dad, you sure that hip is going to hold up?" Nathan asked, locking the car. Voice easy and casual and attentive in the way I now understand was performance. "I've done this trail a dozen times," I told him. "The only thing slowing me down is your mother stopping to photograph every piece of sandstone she finds interesting." Diane, already 15 meters ahead, didn't turn around. "I photograph geology," she called back. "It's called being culturally engaged." "Graham." Priya laughed. It was a warm sound. Natural. Completely convincing. She tucked her arm into Nathan's and leaned against his shoulder, and the four of us walked into the morning like a family that had nothing to fear from each other. We talked about ordinary things for the first 2 kilometers. Nathan mentioned a client project going well. Priya asked Diane about a ceramics exhibition she'd been preparing pieces for. I complained about a neighbor's fence encroachment, and everyone absorbed my irritation with the practiced patience of people who had been doing exactly that for many years. It felt like a normal Sunday. It was designed to feel that way. Here is what you need to understand about our property before any of the rest of this makes sense. The Whitfield land outside Leura sits on 38 acres that my father purchased in 1978. He was a school teacher who'd saved carefully and quietly for 2 decades, bought land that everyone around him considered marginal steep gradient, heavily wooded, a creek that ran well in winter and thinned in summer, and an old stone cottage that needed more work than it was worth. He built a proper house on 12 of those acres. I grew up in it. Diane and I raised Nathan there. The remaining 26 acres on the western boundary sat undisturbed. My father called it the patience land. He said it would be worth something one day. He was right, though not in the way any of us anticipated. 8 months before that Sunday morning, a letter arrived from a company called Blue Ridge Heritage Developments Ty Limited, registered in Victoria, inquiring about heritage tourism development potential on our western boundary. I assumed it was a routine approach, set it on the kitchen bench, and forgot about it. The incident happened at the section locals call the Narrowback, a stretch of path above the valley where the sandstone shelf drops sharply to the left. A serious fall, and the track compresses to barely 1.5 meters wide. I'd walked it without concern every time I'd come here. I was 3 or 4 paces ahead of Diane. Nathan and Priya were behind her. What I remember: the morning air cold on my face, the eucalypts below pale and still, the satisfying ache of a body doing what it was built for. Then a sound from Diane, a short, involuntary gasp. Then she was falling sideways, and I turned without thinking, and something hit me hard from behind. 2 hands, centered between my shoulder blades, deliberate and final. Then there was no path, just the drop, the sandstone edge tearing my jacket sleeve, brush and rock rushing upward. And then a ledge below the main trail face, narrow and cold, where I landed on my right side with a force that pushed the air entirely from my body. Silence, then a groan from nearby, then Diane's voice, strained and thin. "Graham, I'm here." She was 3 meters to my left, pressed against the rock face, a cut above her eyebrow bleeding cleanly down her cheek. I ran inventory. Left hip the replaced one, mercifully intact. 2 ribs on the right side, definitely compromised. Right wrist, bent wrong when I'd reached out. Both knees, functional against all reasonable expectation. Above us, voices. Nathan's first. "Oh God! Oh God!" They went over. Then Priya, cutting through his panic with a precision that told me everything I would later confirm. "Are they moving?" A pause. 1 second. 2. Nathan. "Quieter." "I can't see." Priya. "Quieter still. And I will hear this particular arrangement of words for the remainder of my life. We have to go. We have to go. Right now. Not, I'll ring 000. Not, let me get down to them. We have to go right now." I opened my mouth. Diane's hand found my arm in the dark below the ledge, grip fierce and purposeful for a woman who was clearly in significant pain. "Don't," she said. "Don't make a sound." "Diane." She looked at me. Her eyes were clear in a way that frightened me, the clarity of someone who had been waiting, without knowing exactly how it would arrive, for this precise moment. "Play along," she said. "They need to believe we're gone." My wife, who wept at news stories about injured wildlife and kept every letter her students ever wrote her, was instructing me to feign death after our son had pushed us from a cliff. The part of my brain responsible for rational response had apparently decided to take the morning off. Above us, footsteps. Moving away. Then silence, except for the wind coming up the valley and the distant sound of a currawong going about its mourning unbothered. We lay still for 90 seconds that felt like a geological epoch. Then Diane made a sound I had not heard in 31 years of marriage. It was somewhere between a long exhale and a quiet sob, like someone finally setting down luggage they had been carrying for so long they'd stopped noticing the weight was theirs. "There's something I should have told you," she said. "A long time ago." "We need to focus on getting up first," I said. "You need to hear this before we move." Her voice was steady in the way that means someone has rehearsed. "Graham," the woman Nathan brought home. Priya Okafor. I looked her up. 8 months ago, when Blue Ridge's letter arrived. There is a woman by that name. Heritage consultant. Brisbane. UQ. Law graduate. She went on long service leave 14 months ago. She has been completely unreachable since. I stared at the sandstone above us. "The woman in our house is not Priya," Diane said. I don't know her real name. I know who sent her, and I know what they're looking for." She paused. "Because I'm the one who has it." "Has what?" She closed her eyes briefly. "A folder. Documents. Proof that your father's purchase of the western boundary in 1978 was not legally clean. And proof of who the land actually belonged to. Somewhere above us, a car engine started in the distance and moved away." "Start talking," I said. "Your father bought the full 38 acres from a man named Douglas Carmody in 1978. Douglas was a grazier, third generation. He needed to sell quickly, the drought had broken him. Your father paid a fair price, everything recorded at the land registry. Legal, on its face. But the western 26 acres had been separately transferred to Douglas's younger sister, Margaret Carmody, in 1971 following their mother's death. Margaret had the documentation. Douglas didn't acknowledge it. When he sold to your father, he sold land he no longer had the legal authority to sell." "How do you know this?" Diane shifted, winced. "Margaret found me. 1997. She was 64, living in Katoomba. She'd spent 20 years trying to get someone in the legal system to listen and had run out of money and energy. She came to the school where I was teaching. She'd heard I was Graham Whitfield's wife and that the Whitfields were honest people. She asked me to keep her documents safe, said she trusted a teacher. I lay on a rock ledge in the Blue Mountains while this information arranged itself in my chest like cold water. She gave you the documents and you kept them, and didn't tell me." Diane looked at me with the expression of a woman who had rehearsed this particular moment in her imagination many times and still found the reality of it harder than she'd expected. "I was going to tell you," she said. "Then Margaret died. 6 months later. No heirs we could find. No active legal claim. I was pregnant. I put everything in a waterproof sleeve inside the cavity under the stone cottage floor and told myself I would work out what to do when things were less complicated. Then things were never less complicated," I said. "Not until Blue Ridge's letter. Then Nathan started asking me strange questions about the survey records, about whether Dad had ever mentioned any disputes over the western boundary. And then Priya came home from a weekend in the Hunter and I noticed her handwriting was different." I went still. "What do you mean, different?" "She'd signed a birthday card for me in April. Left-handed. She'd told us, said she was one of those people who switches depending on what she's doing. The card in April was right-handed, signature tilted. When she filled out a form at the ceramics studio in July, it was a completely different hand. Different grip, different letter formation." I stared at my wife. "How long have you known she wasn't Priya?" Diane held my gaze. 8 months. 8 months. You sat at Sunday lunches for 8 months. "I was collecting information," she said, in the librarian's voice she uses when she has already decided the conversation is settled. If I'd reacted, they'd have moved faster. I needed to know what they actually wanted. I needed to know how far Nathan was in it. The valley wind came up again. Somewhere below, a creek moved over stones. "How far?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. That was, in itself, an answer. Getting Diane off that ledge, with her left ankle badly swollen and what turned out to be a hairline fracture in her right wrist from catching herself, and my 2 compromised ribs and the hip that was already protesting, took 53 minutes, a length of cord from my pack, and a volume of quiet profanity that I will not reproduce here, but that adequately expressed the situation. At the 20-minute mark, Diane said, "You're compensating badly on the left side." "I'm aware," I told her. "Your gait biomechanics are completely wrong." "My wife," I said, "has apparently been running solo counterintelligence on our family for 8 months. There is a woman in our house using a stolen identity, and someone we raised tried to kill us this morning. So perhaps let me compensate however I need to." She almost smiled. kept climbing. I had not loved her more in 31 years than I did in that moment, which is a complicated thing to reckon with while your ribs are filing formal complaints. At the trailhead, Nathan's Mazda was gone. My Land Cruiser was still there. Tucked under the windscreen wiper, a standard white envelope. Inside, a statutory declaration form, pre-completed, transferring 26 acres of Whitfield land on the western boundary to a company called Ridgeview Conservation Holdings, P.Y. Limited. My signature. Diane's signature. We had signed nothing. She's thorough, Diane said, reading it beside me. She is, I agreed. My stomach had the particular quality of a concrete slab with a compromised foundation. I ran the time. 9:47 a.m. The NSW Land Registry office in Katoomba closed for walk-ins at noon on Sundays. 73 minutes. I got in the truck. Ring Peter Stanhope, I said. Peter was our solicitor of 18 years. 69. Semi-retired. The kind of man who answers Sunday calls because he never developed the habit of not working weekends. 2 rings. Graham Whitfield, he said. This is not a social hour. We need an emergency caveat lodged on the western 26 acres of our Leura property. There is a forged statutory declaration attempting to transfer title to Ridgeview Conservation Holdings Pty Limited. We need it stopped before noon. A pause. The good kind. The kind that means someone is already thinking rather than reacting. Are you safe? We're functional, Diane said from the passenger seat, her wrist wrapped in my spare fleece, her face the color of old sandstone. I'll ring Magistrate Helen Chow, Peter said. She owes me a disagreement about a 2019 contract matter that I was correct about. Emergency caveat by 11:30. Do not go to hospital until this is filed. We did not go to hospital until it was filed. 11:27 a.m. The caveat went through while I was parking at Katoomba District Hospital, and Diane was telling me my parking was crooked, which it was. Peter rang while we were still in the car park. Done. Title's locked. Nobody's moving that land today or any day without a court order. I sat there and felt the adrenaline beginning its slow retreat, which is when your body presents all the invoices it's been holding. Ribs, hip, wrist, a deep, complicated grief I didn't yet have language for. Diane's phone buzzed. Nathan. Mom, Dad, we lost you both on the trail. Priya and I have been waiting at the car park. Are you okay? We've been ringing. Please ring us. I read it twice. Thought about Nathan at 9 years old, falling asleep in the back seat on long drives, his hand finding mine in the dark without waking up. Nathan at 17, bringing me a cup of tea without being asked during a difficult week at work, not saying anything, just setting it beside me. Nathan at 30, ringing every Sunday without fail. Then I thought about 2 hands. Centered, deliberate, no hesitation. I put the phone in my pocket. Inside, the registrar told Diane she had a grade 3 ankle sprain, a hairline fracture in the right wrist, a moderate concussion, and should not be walking without support. Diane thanked him and asked whether that was a suggestion or a clinical instruction, which is a question I have learned, over 3 decades, has only one meaning when she asks it. I sat beside her bed while they bandaged her and made my list. Ridgeview Conservation Holdings, PT Limited registered address, directors, formation date, the real Priya Okafor location, status, how long she'd been displaced, Blue Ridge Heritage Development's connection to Ridgeview, same principles? The cavity under the stone cottage floor, we needed those documents before anyone else did. And Nathan, my son, somewhere between perpetrator and pawn, and I was going to find out exactly where, regardless of what it cost me to know. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, Peter had the full picture. Ridgeview Conservation Holdings and Blue Ridge Heritage Developments shared a registered agent, a property law firm in North Sydney. The firm's senior partner, one Colin Drew, had clerked in the NSW Land and Environment Court in the early 2000s, specialized in heritage title disputes and rural boundary claims across the Central West and Blue Mountains regions, and his mother's maiden name, which I found in a 2006 death notice in the Blue Mountains Gazette. Carmody. I put my notes down. Douglas Carmody's great-nephew, Colin Drewy, had spent years constructing legal architecture to reclaim land his great-uncle had fraudulently sold in 1978. Not for any principle of justice, for the same reason these things are almost always done. 2 months before Drewy had incorporated Ridgeview, a geological assessment had been filed with the Blue Mountains Council, a significant underground aquifer on the western boundary of our property, projected to support premium spring water extraction at a scale estimated between $30 and $70 million in commercial value over 30 years. The same month, the letter from Blue Ridge arrived in our letterbox. My father's patience land, it turned out. I drove to our property that evening. The stone cottage was undisturbed. The cavity under the floor, a gap I'd known about since childhood, where my father stored seeds and documents he considered important, took 20 minutes to locate properly in the dark. Inside, a waterproof sleeve in reasonable condition. Inside that, 2 documents. Margaret Carmody's transfer deed from 1971 and a letter from her mother's estate solicitor, confirming the Western Acres were Margaret's alone. Diane had kept them for 27 years. The ink had yellowed at the margins. Every word was intact. Nathan's Mazda was outside the house when I returned from the cottage. He was in the kitchen, still in his hiking clothes, coffee untouched in front of him. When I came through the door, the color left his face the way water leaves a glass when it tips. "Sit down," I said. He sat. He looked very young and very frightened, which was both true and not the whole truth. The story came out in stages. Colin Drew had approached Nathan 14 months ago, presented himself as a property solicitor with a legitimate heritage title dispute, showed Nathan the aquifer assessment, told him the legal challenge was a certainty regardless of what anyone did, but that if the family cooperated with a voluntary title transfer before proceedings began, they would receive a settlement of $1.8 million. He told Nathan nobody would be harmed. He said it would look like a commercial negotiation. He said the woman he was sending her name was actually Serena Volk. Former paralegal would simply gather information and help facilitate paperwork. He said it would be clean, Nathan said. His voice had the quality of someone who had been repeating this to himself for a long time and had finally stopped believing it. "And when you found out she wasn't Priya?" I asked. He put his hands flat on the table. "Dree told me the real Priya had taken a position overseas, and this woman had agreed to step in for the consulting work. That she'd already met you both, and it was simpler to maintain the continuity." "You believed that?" I said. "I wanted to," he said. "That is a different thing, and I know it." There was a silence in the kitchen that had been waiting 30 years to happen in some form. "Your mother knew the whole time," I told him. "From the moment the letter arrived, she was watching everything Serena did. She has known who sent her for 8 months. The only reason she didn't act sooner was that she was waiting to understand exactly where you were in it." Nathan looked at the table. "Stay here," I said. "Don't touch your phone. I'll be back." Serena Volk was in the guest room, dressed and composed in the particular way of professionals who have already calculated the exits. She had heard the front door. She was fast. Her face arranged itself into the relief of someone unexpectedly finding out good news. "Graham." "Oh, thank goodness," we thought. "Put the phone on the table," I said. The relief dissolved. Instantly. A professional neutral underneath that confirmed everything. I leaned in the doorway. Detective Sergeant Louise Catry, from the Blue Mountains Police Area Command, is 40 minutes away. She already has the forged declaration, the corporate documentation linking Dree to Ridgeview and Blue Ridge, and a formal complaint filed at Katoomba Police Station at 2 o'clock this afternoon. The NSW Law Society received a professional conduct complaint at 3. Colin Dree's North Sydney office was served with an emergency injunction this morning. I paused. The real Priya Okafor is currently on extended leave in Hobart. She has been contacted. She is, as you might imagine, not pleased. Serena Volk looked at the window, then back at me. I'll need to speak with a solicitor. That is the first sensible thing you have said in 14 months. Follow me. Colin Drew was arrested the following Tuesday. Fraud, conspiracy, filing false instruments, and obtaining financial advantage by deception. When investigators reviewed the corporate trail, they found Drew had attempted a similar land transfer in the Hunter Valley 4 years prior under a different corporate structure. That matter had been abandoned when the landowner died before proceedings were complete. Dre had simply pivoted to the next option, which had been us. The aquifer assessment was conservative. The geological firm retained by Peter on behalf of our family reported a projected value closer to $55 million over 25 years. It took Peter 5 months to build the case from Margaret Carmody's documents. Her deed was unambiguous. Douglas Carmody had sold land he had no legal right to sell. The title had been compromised since 1978. And because Margaret had died without direct heirs, and because the documents had been held in custody and brought forward by the affected landowners who discovered the original fraud, Peter found a legal mechanism precedent-setting enough that it will apparently be cited in a law faculty textbook at the University of Sydney, by which the Whitfield family, as documented good faith purchasers who had actively uncovered and corrected the fraud, retained full title to the property and received formal compensation from Drew's held assets. I won't tell you the exact figure. It had 7 digits. Diane cried quietly for about 4 minutes when Peter told us. Then she asked whether she needed to do anything to initiate the paperwork, because she had a ceramics exhibition in 3 weeks and her wrist was nearly healed and she'd like to understand her schedule. I looked at the ceiling. Serena Volk took a plea agreement. 14 months, minimum 9. She gave full evidence against Drew in exchange for the reduction. The court proceedings for Drew took 2 weeks. I testified for 3 hours. I wore the same jacket I'd worn to Nathan's university graduation, the one that still fit properly, because I wanted to look exactly like what I was, a 62-year-old retired surveyor from Leura who had been pushed off a cliff in the Blue Mountains and was expressing, through formal legal channels, his profound dissatisfaction with the experience. The jury took less than a day, guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, I watched Colin Drew's face. It had the expression of a man who had constructed an elaborate mechanism and genuinely could not understand why it had stopped working. 41 years as a structural surveyor gave me the answer to that, though I did not offer it to him. You ignored the load-bearing points. You assumed the foundation had no memory. Foundations always have memory. Nathan is a more complicated matter and more private. He cooperated with investigators entirely and completely. He testified against Drew and did not minimize his own role. He sat at our kitchen table on a Wednesday evening in October and said everything that needed saying. And Diane and I said everything that needed saying back. And very little of it was simple or quick or comfortable, and most of it belongs only to us. There was no prison, cooperating witness, deferred prosecution, 2 years probation, mandatory financial counseling, community service. He has moved back to the Blue Mountains, not close to us, but not to Sydney either. He calls on Sundays. Sometimes I answer on the second ring. Sometimes it takes longer. Diane answers every time. She has 31 years more practice than I do at knowing which cracks are structural and which ones heal. We opened the Netherstone cottage in January and repoured the floor. The cavity had held through 27 winters, which I found professionally satisfying. The documents inside were intact. Margaret Carmody's handwriting deliberate and careful even at 64. The ink at the margins brown with age, but every word legible. Diane read the letter twice. Then she handed it to Peter without telling me what it said. I asked her about it that evening. She says she's tired, Diane told me. She says she tried everything she could. She says she hopes whoever finds it has more luck than she did, and that she believes in the patience of honest people. She folded her hands around her teacup. She says she chose to trust a teacher because teachers know that some things take a long time to become clear. I looked at my wife. 6 months from the cliff, walking without a boot, 3 new ceramics pieces fired and ready for the exhibition, 4 books going at once as she always had. I thought about what a structure actually is, not the beams and the concrete, but the relationship between the weight and what holds it. I thought about 27 years of a secret that was kept not out of deception, but out of a particular kind of careful hope that the right moment would arrive. I thought about the fact that the right moment did arrive, dressed as the worst morning of my life. Margaret had good judgment, I said. She really did, Diane agreed. We still walk in the Blue Mountains. Different trails now, mostly. But twice a year, we go back to Evans Lookout, just the 2 of us, and we walk the full trail to the Narrowback and stand at the section where the path narrows and the valley falls away below. We don't talk about what happened there. We don't need to. The mountains have been doing what mountains do for a very long time. They are not interested in the plans of people who underestimate what has been quietly standing its ground beneath their feet. Neither are we. If there is anything this experience made undeniable to me, it is this. The most dangerous assumption you can make about another person is that their silence means they have nothing to say. My wife said nothing for 8 months because she understood something I have come to believe is true in surveying, in marriage, and in the longer business of living. A premature response to a compromised structure can bring the whole thing down. Sometimes the most courageous act is to hold still, gather information, and move only when the ground beneath you is certain. The second thing, greed is never really about the money. It is about the belief that what someone else has built should, by rights, be yours. That belief is a crack in a foundation, and it will always, given enough pressure, find its way to the surface. And the third, if you are fortunate enough to have someone beside you who keeps walking on a fractured wrist up a mountain because there is work to do that is not a small thing, do not treat it as one. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to Whispered Truths and leave a comment. Tell us where you're listening from. These stories exist because you do. We'll see you next time.